Hi, I'm James Skitchy Zimmers, and I'm here today from the Paul Reed Smith Tech Center to talk to you about biasing your tube amp. Setting the bias on your tube amp is an essential part of maintenance and is critical to make sure you're getting the best sound out of your amplifier. Before we get started, let's go into what bias is. Setting the bias on your tube amp is actually controlling the current flowing into the tubes. If your bias is set too high, your sound will get mushy and your tubes will get hot and it will shorten the lifespan, could even red plate and burn out completely. Setting the bias too low can cause your tone to sound choked and could shut down the amp altogether. Before attempting to bias your PRS amp, please make sure you are both comfortable and familiar with the process, as there is the potential to damage your tubes. We will need a few tools to set the bias on our amplifiers. First up, a quality multimeter with a millivolt DC setting. We will also need a jeweler's screwdriver, either flathead or Phillips head, depending on which model of amp you own. When it comes time to bias your amp, we will want to set it up properly. First off, make sure you're plugged into the wall, your amp is turned on and off of standby, you have your speaker cable plugged into a speaker, and you have no instrument cable plugged into the front of the amp. Today I am biasing an Archon 50, which is a model that contains two power tubes. First, we will take the common probe and insert it into the common port on the back of the amp. Then we will take the voltage probe and insert it into either the left or the right port. The left port represents the left tube, the right port represents the right tube. When biasing a PRS amp, we will bias the tubes in pairs, and we will use the recommended biasing voltage printed on the back of the amp near the bias port. On today's amp, an Archon 50, we will be setting the bias to between 25 and 30 millivolts. Our PRS amps ship with matched tube sets, but after usage can drift a few millivolts apart. When biasing a set of tubes that are not matched or have drifted apart, we will be biasing to the average of the pair. For instance, my left tube is biased at 28.1 millivolts, and my right tube is biased at 25.3. That gives us an average of about 26.5, which falls within our range. While this amplifier is within the biasing range, we're going to try to move the collective average up to the hotter end of the biasing spectrum. We know that our average was about 27 millivolts, so let's move it up 2 millivolts. Using our screwdriver, we're going to make the turn clockwise to raise the bias in small increments. It is a very sensitive adjustment. So let's move it up about 2 millivolts. Check the other tube. And see that they have both moved about the same amount. After setting the bias, we have one tube at 31.4 and the other tube reading 28.5. That gives us a collective average of right around our 30 millivolts that we were looking for. If you have an amplifier with 4 power tubes, the back of your amp will look a little different. You will still have the common in the center, you will have 4 tube bias ports, and a slightly different potentiometer to adjust your bias. These bias ports correspond to the tubes underneath of them, just like amplifiers that only contain 2 power tubes. When setting the bias on a 4-tube system, a quad, you will use the potentiometer to adjust the collective average of all 4 tubes at once. Finally, let's cover some troubleshooting scenarios. If, while biasing your amp, you find a port has a 0 millivolt reading, you most likely have a bad tube in the corresponding slot. In addition, if you find that you have more than an 8 millivolt difference in a set of tubes, we suggest you replace them with a new matched set. And what if you plug your probes in, your tubes are lit, and you get no reading? You have most likely blown a fuse, and we suggest you contact PRS customer service. Thanks for watching, and if you have any other questions or concerns, please feel free to contact PRS customer service. Have a great day.